Hello. This is so embarrassing. The video stopped in the middle. So now all the people behind me at Divine Lake Park, which is where I am, it's right behind Baghdad Elementary, and the birds are going to have to hear this lecture again. I'm going to be kind of quiet because there's people fishing. So, if you're fishing, you don't like it when there's somebody behind you talking about history. So, hopefully my nice camera won't turn off again, because if it does, I'll know what I'm going to do. All right. So, today we are working on chapter 27. We're in week 6 of the online COVID-19 journey that we're taking together. And chapter 27 is Triumph to Tragedy, 1988 to 2001. Questions are pretty simple this week. The first one, you talk about the Bush presidency. The second one, you talk about the Clinton presidency. And the third one, that one's going to be more complicated. So I'll try to keep this lecture short because that one's going to be longer because your book doesn't do a great job of covering it. And I looked for online sources, but they're all really weird and super biased. And it's either like, oh, USA is the greatest country ever and we manage foreign policy perfectly, or USA is a spawn of Satan. And, probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. Although I like the United States. Yeah, that's what I teach. And I live here. And look, there's a lake. It's beautiful. They don't have those in other countries. Oh, if you haven't been to this park, super, super nice. Natural setting. You can go fishing. There's flowers. There's a big green space. You can walk the dog. There's ducks. Hopefully they'll stay away from me because I didn't have much luck with them at the Veterans Memorial Park. All right. So Bush. Bush is Reagan's vice president, one of the most qualified people that we have ever had in the presidency. He had served in Congress. He was a decorated military hero, World War II veteran. He had been an advisor in many different ways. He had served as the head of the CIA in the late 70s, in a period where we wanted to clean up the CIA because it was a little sketchy, and we tried to kill Castro a bunch of times and overthrew people's governments in kind of secretive ways. And he also served as ambassador to China. So he's really well connected. He's highly educated. He's a very genteel kind of fellow. What I'm saying is you wouldn't see, the Twitter storm that you see with the current president, but different background and different time. So I'm not trying to don't get upset with me. I'm not trying to be anti-Trump. I'm not. Okay. So back to Bush. And I did mention he had been Reagan's vice president. He runs against Michael Dukakis, who runs a particularly bad campaign. Doesn't probably matter much anyway, because Bush was pretty popular, because Reagan was pretty popular, and the economy was pretty good, although we're starting to see a little bit of a downward slide. So one of the things they'll talk about in the campaign is how are we going to balance the budget, because we had started to develop a pretty good budget deficit, not the kind we have now. Oh my, we were still in the billions then, which seemed terrible to us, but we didn't have a budget that started with a T. So now we do, and we would love to have this budget back. Oh my goodness. Okay, but he said, well, back to the budget. There are really only a couple ways to solve a budget deficit. You either have to spend less or raise more money. And raising more money, it's not like the government sells stuff except bonds to pay off debts, but they only sell those because we have debts. So you either have to raise taxes or spend less if you're a government. Like for me, I'll get like 2 or 3 jobs to pay off stuff, or to make sure I can pay my bills. But the government can't have 2 or 3 jobs. They just take more of our money, which if they spend it, they got to pay it off. But anyway, but George Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes. That's going to come back to haunt him, because he will end up raising income taxes on the highest level of income earners, which you think because it's a small percentage, oh, those guys won't care. But you remember who those guys are. Those are the guys who control companies. Those are the guys who donate to political campaigns. And those are the guys who run political parties. So, yeah, if you tick those guys off, it's like doing something against the old folks. They don't necessarily have money. Some of them do. But they all vote because they got nothing else to do. So In this instance, sorry, bug. Oh, in this instance, this will come back to haunt him a little bit. Okay, military stuff that happens during the Bush presidency. It's only 4 years. It's only 4 years, so it should be a pretty quick talk, right? Okay. So, instance number one, 1989, we overthrow Manuel Noriega in Panama. And I know you're thinking, we've done that before to build a canal. Yeah. This might have been a little more legitimate. I don't know. It's your decision. If it's ever legitimate to overthrow somebody else's sort of elected leader. But this guy, our problem with him was he's a big drug lord, which he was. And so we arrest him on those charges, kind of have to overthrow the government to do that. Oops. And he goes to jail in the United States for drug charges. They put him on trial in Florida, as I recall, and then put him in a supermax facility with like 3 other people or something. I think that might be, sorry, in the hills in Colorado, but I haven't been, I haven't, yeah, not that level of criminal. Not really any level of criminal. But if you're wondering, was it controversial? A little, except, the drug lord thing. So it doesn't really hurt him in any meaningful way politically. It's not great for Noriega. But, oh, sorry, move this so you can, oh, do you want to see that grill behind me? Okay. Um, well, it's not a huge problem for him politically. But this this happens really early in his presidency. We're also having a savings and loan issue. These are banks that have lower standards, lower legislative policies for how they can loan out money so they can make riskier loans, which they did in the 80s. And so people couldn't pay off those loans in the 80s. So those banks' savings and loans collapse, and we have to bail them out because they're federally insured. So it's a really expensive time period in that way. We already had a debt. And oh, by the way, George Bush's oldest son, Neil Bush, he's the secret Bush. No one ever talks about him because he's sketchy. Had a little cocaine problem, which not uncommon for wealthy people in the 80s, but also managed a savings and loan, and we bailed that out as well. So he's good. Yeah, the bad Bush, Neil Bush, he's probably better now. Okay, but anyway, so we've got Panama not a revolution. We just overthrow Manuel Noriega and put him in jail for drug charges. You also have the savings and loan issue, but then the Gulf War. The Gulf War is probably pretty good for Bush politically. So, sorry, what he'll do, or what happens, excuse me, there's a really bad dude named Saddam Hussein, and he is the leader of Iraq. And he's just bad. If you disagree with him, not only does he get rid of you, gets rid of you in brutal ways. He tended to put you in the wood chipper, and he's just a horrible dude. Okay. So, what he does that causes problems at the UN is that he takes over Kuwait, and Kuwait's its own country. Now, I know, Kuwait has a lot of oil. So does Iraq. A lot of folks in the Middle East have a lot of oil. Um, so sometimes people will say this is about oil, and it might be. Again, your decision on that. Although, research it because it is about oil, but it's about other stuff as well. So. Saddam Hussein, leader of Iraq, says, hey, Kuwait's our 13th province. We're taking it back. And Kuwait says, hey, we don't feel the same way about this, and goes to the UN. So George Bush, with his diplomatic abilities, goes to the UN along with Colin Powell is our secretary. No, he's the chair of the Joint Chiefs. But he's the head of the military is what I'm trying to say. So these are two highly respected folks. They go to the UN and they say, hey, Kuwait doesn't want to be the 13th province of Iraq. So let's issue a proclamation from the UN that says, hey, get out Kuwait. Or excuse me, Iraq, get out of Kuwait. So they did. And it was 40 nations who got together to do this. Now, there's hardly ever 40 nations that agree on much. So this is fairly impressive, and it's even countries like the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who usually is always pretty pro influential Arab nation, but not in this case because, this was kind of wrong. So we tell Iraq to get out of Kuwait, along with 39 other nations, and they don't. So then we start honestly bombing the crap out of Iraq and their troops. Now, this is a televised war, but it's a pretty well managed televised war because what we see are the we definitely don't have any reporters in Iraq or Kuwait while this is going on. We have them with the troops. And they go with the troops with the understanding that they're not supposed to reveal their locations because you know it is dangerous if you do that. So they shoot footage from the planes. So you don't see people dying. It's kind of on our end, it looks like a bloodless conflict. Of course, it's not on the Iraqi end or the Kuwait end, but it's also super fast. It's like 42 days. So we bomb the crap out of Iraq or the Iraqi troops in Kuwait. And then we send in ground troops to get their surrender. And there are troops, Iraqi troops, that surrender to news crews. I mean, these guys did not want any of this. It was okay if they were taking over Kuwait, because Kuwait doesn't really have a big military. They don't really have a military. So, but when they have to face 40 nations, primarily, I know we sent most of the stuff, but 40 nations and troops, no, they don't want to fight. Saddam Hussein was just hoping he could do this and people would leave him alone, but they did not. So the first part of the conflict is called, or the mission is called Desert Shield, and that's the buildup to troops. And we primarily stage things in Saudi Arabia, which is probably a sign of the friendship between George Bush and the Saudi royal family. It's a fairly long-standing friendship between the U.S. and Saudis. And Desert Storm, which is January 17th to February 28th, which is the actual combat section. So it's really successful. Very few people in the world think it's a bad idea. And I guarantee you, if we had had a presidential election in 1991, George Bush would have been reelected. They do surveys. Do you like the president? Do you approve of him? His approval rating from both parties was 90%. We will never have another president who has a 90% approval rating. So he's super popular. But he loses an election just a year later because the economy collapses. Okay? So you need to remember if you're ever president and the economy collapses, unless there's a very unusual reason like an international depression or maybe a pandemic, you are definitely going to lose. Okay? So Bush loses because the recession's bad, because he raised taxes, and because a third party emerged. And this is the Reform Party, which is led by a fellow named Ross Perot, who is a billionaire from Texas, and he manages a data service. And his son owns that giant airport that keeps expanding in the Fort Worth area if you ever drive up that way. So he's goes on TV a lot. He always has a chart and a graph. We're kind of impressed by him because he's a self-made billionaire. He does say some crazy stuff. They make a little fun of him on Saturday Night Live. Mostly his plan is, I'm a rich guy, I can solve problems. Now, he doesn't get elected. We wait a little bit longer to elect a billionaire. However, he does pull enough votes away from the Republican Party that a relative unknown fellow named Bill Clinton, William Jefferson Clinton, gets elected. And he gets elected mostly because he's kind of cool and because Ross Perot pulls just enough votes away from the Republicans that Clinton is able to get elected. So other controversial thing that's going on during that election is something called NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And this is something that both Clinton and Bush thought was a good idea. It's getting rid of tariffs and different laws that limit trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. But Ross Perot said that that giant sucking sound you heard, that noise, was all of our jobs going to Mexico, which might have briefly been true. There have been some issues with NAFTA, but they're probably not necessarily all the jobs going. I don't know. You would have to decide that. But Clinton's in favor of it. Bush is in favor of it. Ross Perot argues against it, and he has a pretty good contingent of probably what you would think of as libertarian type Republicans who agree with him. He's an odd fellow, but he's fairly influential, and in a capitalist society, and that's what we are, and it's fine. I get paid for teaching history, so I like that as well. But in a capitalist society, sometimes it is true that the wealthier fellows do get a little more pull, a lot more pull. Now, that's true in a socialist society as well, or a democratic socialist society. All right, I'm just about done. Let me pan a little bit more. I know you can see the grill, but there's lovely benches. There's some of those crazy ducks. You can see them in the background. Oh my gosh. Oh, there's a fishing person. So I don't want to necessarily, put them on camera. They probably don't want to be on camera. Okay. All right. It was lovely to see you. Next time I see you, I will talk to you about Clinton. That'll be a much more interesting talk. If you ever needed a babysitter, Bush would have been better than Clinton. That's all I have to say. All right. I hope you guys are doing well. Have a lovely afternoon. Come to Divine Lake Park behind Baghdad Elementary. It's really pretty. Okay. I'll try to do the next one from a park as well. All right. Bye, guys.